I get this comment all the time. Why grow potatoes and onions when they are so cheap to buy at the grocery store? And after a pretty terrible year of growing both of them, I'm starting to think they might be right. Today I wanted to figure out were potatoes and onions actually worth growing in my garden this year. Potatoes. How much food did I get? I planted 1.5 whole raised beds with potatoes for a total of 46 square feet and harvested just over 33 pounds, but I had expected a harvest of 72 pounds from that space. So I harvested less than half of what I was expecting. I do think this is partly because we had some unusual weather this year, including some pretty strong winds, and my potato plants died back before they really had a chance to produce many tubers. They didn't even flower, which is really unusual. That works out to about 0.72 pounds per square foot, which isn't a great yield for the amount of space that they took up. And in a relatively small garden, every square foot is precious. I need crops to actually move the needle for my family, and how much food that crop produces is part of the equation. How much money did they save? Another goal of my garden is to save some money at the grocery store. So it's not enough just for a crop to produce lots of food if that food is also relatively cheap to buy, even organically. Right now, I can buy organic yellow potatoes at Walmart for about $2 a pound. So if I had bought the 33 pounds I grew, I would have saved about $60. But the question really is $60 worth 46 square feet of gardening space? $60 over the course of a year isn't a huge amount of savings for a crop that took up 46 square feet of space. While potatoes are actually one of the kings of the vegetable world when it comes to calories, but that's not really what I'm trying to get from my garden. Growing a lot of our calories in the space I have just isn't realistic. What I want from my garden is to save some money while also giving my family better access to nutritious food. And when it comes to the nutrition, potatoes aren't necessarily the best use of that space. Crops like broccoli, green beans, carrots, and sweet peppers give my family more of the nutrients that I'm trying to prioritize. So while potatoes can give you a lot of food energy, that's not enough on its own to make them a valuable crop for me. Was it worth the work? Then there's the work. Potatoes are a pretty physically demanding crop when you grow them in ground or in raised beds. You have to dig holes to plant them, hill them up throughout the season so that the potatoes don't turn green. And then when it's time to harvest, you have to dig up all those potatoes back out. While I actually really enjoy harvesting potatoes, it's kind of like a treasure hunt. I'm noticing that every year it seems to get a little more challenging. Maybe some of that is because the excitement wears off year after doing it. But aging is also a real thing. 20-year-old Amy is not the same as 30-year-old Amy. Verdict. So potatoes gave me about $60 worth of food, but took up 46 square feet and a fair amount of physical work. I don't think potatoes are a terrible crop for my garden, but after this year's harvest, I'm questioning whether they deserve this much space. They're definitely getting kicked out of my prime raised bed space. They don't provide enough grocery savings or nutrition to give them some of my best growing space. But then I started thinking, and some of you suggested, what if I grew them in grow bags? So I did the math. I don't currently have grow bags available. So buying 5 10-gallon grow bags would cost me about $26. I'd also need 2 bags of compressed Pro Mix all-purpose soil, which would cost me about $50. So I'd be spending about $76 just to get started before adding seed potatoes or water. I'm estimating a yield of about 5 pounds per 10-gallon bag for Yukon Gold potatoes. So 5 bags would give me roughly 25 pounds of potatoes. That first harvest would cost me about $3 per pound. That's obviously much more expensive than buying potatoes at the grocery store. But I wouldn't have to buy the grow bags or all that soil again every year. After the first year, I'd only need things like amendments, seed potatoes, and water. So grow bags are an option, but at the current potato prices, considering what potatoes actually add to my family's diet, I'm not convinced that they're worth the initial expense, at least not yet. Onions. How much food did I get? I harvested just under 7 pounds of onions from 20 square feet this year. This is unfortunately my worst onion harvest ever. The biggest reason for that was a pest called the allium leaf miner, which absolutely destroyed most of my plants. I had expected a harvest of around 40 pounds from these 20 square feet, so just under 7 pounds was a pretty significant disappointment. How much money did they save? When I looked at what the harvest was actually worth, things don't get much better. Right now, I can buy sweet organic onions for about $1.99 a pound. So the entire onion harvest I spent months growing would have only cost me about $13.43 at the grocery store. That's not much savings. Was the money saved worth the space? This is where onions really start to lose me. I gave onions 20 square feet of my best raised bed space, and in return, I got about $13 worth of food. Now, onions are absolutely useful in my kitchen. They are the flavor base to so many meals. But I don't eat onions in large quantities, and when I'm deciding what deserves space in my garden, I'd rather prioritize crops that contribute more substantial nutrition. And that's where I start thinking about opportunity cost. I could grow herbs for flavor, for example, and they would take up much less space, and many herbs are much more expensive to purchase at the grocery store. And then there's the allium leaf miner. Having to protect the crop with netting adds both cost and maintenance to a crop that's already relatively inexpensive to buy. So at this point, I'm really struggling to make the argument that onions deserve 20 square feet of premium garden space. Was it worth the work? Onions aren't exactly a quick crop either. I start them indoors in January or February, and they're cared for indoors until they go out in April. They take up space for about 4 months until they're ready to harvest in July. And now with the allium leaf miner here, I also need to net the crop and make sure that netting stays completely intact. That's another layer of work, another layer to monitor, and another expense, all for a crop that I can buy organically for about $1.99 a pound. Verdict? So putting all of that together, onions are pretty easy for me to rule out. They're relatively cheap to buy, I don't use huge quantities of them, and they take up space for a large chunk of the growing season. And now they require additional pest protection. And for my small garden, I just don't think they're giving me enough savings or nutritional value to justify that space. And there's other crops I can grow that will provide more food, more nutrition, or more value per square foot, and some of them can even provide flavor too. So for me, onions are losing their spot in my garden next year. What to grow instead? Together, potatoes and onions took up 66 square feet of my garden space this year. Before I decide what gets that space next year, I want to look at what crops I could actually grow, because this is where the opportunity cost gets really interesting. This spring, I harvested 7.5 pounds of lettuce from 6 square feet, 8.3 pounds of cabbage from 6 square feet, and 7.4 pounds of snap peas from only 4.5 square feet. All of those crops produce more pounds per square foot than my potatoes did. But when I look at what those crops are worth at the grocery store, the picture gets even more interesting. The spring mix lettuce I can buy is roughly $8.70 per pound. Based on my actual harvest, that means that my lettuce produced about $10.85 of grocery value per square foot. My snap peas are about $6.65 a pound. So my harvest worked out to about $11 of grocery store value per square foot. And then there's cabbage. I actually harvested more cabbage per square foot than I did potatoes. But cabbage is also inexpensive at the grocery store. That only worked out to about $1.35 of grocery store value per square foot. That's almost exactly the same as my potatoes at $1.31 per square foot. I think that's really important because more pounds doesn't necessarily mean more value. For me, the crops that really stand out are the ones that can produce a lot of food in a relatively small amount of space and are expensive enough that growing them myself actually saves us money. And that's exactly what I need to be thinking about when deciding what will get those 66 square feet next season. I'm not going to replace all 66 square feet with lettuce or snap peas. Lettuce is highly perishable, and unlike potatoes and onions, I can't harvest it and expect it to feed my family for months. But that's also part of the trade-off that I'm trying to figure out in my garden. Potatoes and onions have the advantage of being inexpensive, but they also store really well. Lettuce and snap peas have a much higher grocery store value, but They're foods that you need to grow and eat while they're still fresh. So I don't think there's one number that tells me which crop is absolute best. What it does show me is that there are some crops that make much better use of my limited garden space than potatoes and onions. And those are the crops that I want to prioritize more. So for the 2027 garden season, potatoes and onions are moving over to the I'm not growing list, where they will join garlic and corn. Instead, I'll be looking for a local farmer who can supply us with roughly 60 pounds of potatoes and 25 to 30 pounds of onions that I would normally aim to grow. That way, I can support a local family farm and our local food system and get the potatoes and onions my family uses without dedicating 66 square feet of my garden to growing them. And that frees up those 66 square feet to grow crops that I think will provide more nutritional value for my family and greater savings at the grocery store. For me, that's really what makes a crop worth growing. Not just how many pounds I can harvest, but what I'm getting back for the space, time, and effort I put in growing it. What crops have you decided aren't worth the growing space in your garden? Let me know in the comments.